lucky enough this afternoon to be joined by the wonderful Tillie Johnston, who is down in the Yarra Valley doing enormous things. Your Pinot is apparently doing enormous things, and that's really what I want to dig down into in this conversation with you, Tillie. You've really just exploded onto the wine scene, and you've got a fascinating story starting from, well, I want to go back even before your days in, was it sports and exercise science, and you were trying to pay your way through university, working in different cellar doors. I want to go back to the very start when you were enjoying bottles of red around the family table. That was something I really resonated with. But my first question is, when I came across you, I was looking at all these really cool and groovy images. Where's the hair?
Oh, no. Yeah. It blew away in a storm.
Really?
It's been pretty windy this season.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I miss my dreads, and it was a huge decision to make because, like, they are me, they're part of my brand, and it was such a heartache that I went through to decide, was this the right thing to do, because I've shaped so much of, you know, Tillie J Wines and who I am around my dreadlocks. So it was really hard to get rid of dreaded Tillie, but I feel like I've kind of come to the conclusion that my dreads were something I cherished and had when I was traveling, when I went away and got a whole bunch of experience for about 4 years and just did the vintage hop from northern to southern hemisphere, and that was sort of the transient gypsy side of Tillie. Right. And yeah, I just got this feeling when I settled down, came back to the Yarra, put some roots down, that it was a new chapter, and it was just time to rock a new hairstyle. That's one side of the coin. Yep. But the other one, probably the more practical one, is that I started working out in the vineyard and sort of transitioned from being in the cellar and decided to take a job amongst the vines. And the less romantic story, I guess, is that coming home smelling like elemental sulfur when you're spraying during spray season is just not good. And when it just infiltrates your bed and your clothes and every single item of clothing that you own, it's not the best. So, you know, dreads, you don't wash them all that often, well, not as frequently as, you know, undreaded hair. So it was probably the more practical approach was to brush them out and just go back.
Don't get me wrong, you look terrific.
Regular.
You look great. Fantastic.
Thank you. I love them.
But I thought the dreads were like, who's this groovy person? And I think in a photo that I looked at, partner Tom.
Yeah.
So he's
got dreads.
He's got dreads. Okay,
he
so
does,
he's rocking the dreads.
Exactly. Yeah. So he's holding on to his for now, but he sees how much easier it is for me to maintain the hairstyle I have now, and he's a little bit envious, but yeah, he's still rocking the dreads, and I encourage that. So, yeah.
Great. Okay, so it's a story podcast about stories, wine people, yourself. Let's go back to the very, very beginning. Reading about you.
Yep.
I think I mentioned this before, something that really, really resonated with me and was really the genesis of what would eventually be my passion for wine, was those family dinners around the dinner table. Even before I appreciated anything about wine meant something to me, even though I didn't realize it. And I think it was just such a subtle part of so many lovely memories I had with my family, sitting around on a Sunday afternoon talking trash or controversy. There was always a bottle of wine, and didn't really click with me, but built into something just wonderful. And I want to hear about your experience with that, because you mention it in a number of interviews you do. I think that your early family experiences with wine sort of gave you a subtle push in that direction. So tell me all about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like the whole subconscious thing is definitely an element that has made its way into my life. Like I lived in Adelaide from about the age of 2 till 10, and then just through Dad's work we lived there and then moved back to Victoria in 2000. But I think from that very young age, like I was always dragged around cellar doors and wineries and wine events with my parents, sort of in the Barossa, in the Clare, and in McLaren Vale, all those sort of areas.
Can I ask, sorry, what did your parents do?
Yeah, right. Well, Mum is a disability worker. She her background is, and also horticulture as well. So she's done a bit of horticulture and a bit of disability respite care. She's now more or less retired. And Dad is a chemical engineer, and he actually loosely works in the wine industry. He sells filtration products to a lot of the larger wineries out there. Mm-hmm. And so we have a fair bit of sort of, loose wine banter, and he's learning a bunch off of me through sort of my experience working in wineries and doing harvests around the world. So, yeah, we kind of help each other in a way. Yeah. I give him a little bit of sort of background about what perhaps the applications for a lot of the products that he's selling will do within the winery, so complementing obviously the knowledge that he knows. But and then he gives me the inside scoop about what's going on over at, Accolade or something like that over in South Australia, and we have a little bit of a chuckle and sort of, have a good bit of banter about our knowledge about the wine industry and our experiences. So, they're both not, I haven't come at this from a wine background in that my family's owned a winery or a vineyard or anything like that, but just a good solid love of wine and going to cellar doors and drinking a good bottle of red with a roast on a Sunday afternoon. So that's how I come to it, and living sort of at the gateway of the Yarra Valley. That's where my family home is now. I've continued that exposure, I guess. And while I was studying, which sports science you touched on there, I'd held down sort of casual cellar door jobs, working in a couple of different winery restaurants, and sort of that was my casual income as I was boarding at home and finishing my undergraduate degree. So, had always been sort of dabbled in the wine industry, even though I hadn't really jumped into it fully.
What is it like growing up in a massive wine culture like the Yarra?
Yeah, well, I'm not until right now. I wasn't living close to Hillsville, which I feel like is the epicenter. Like, it's the winemakers and the viticulturalists sort of central point to the Yarra Valley, which is just saturated with beautiful sort of great food and great pubs, and you bump into half a dozen people when you go down for a beer on a Friday afternoon. But where I grew up, sort of Montrose on the foot of the Mount Dandenongs, which is probably about 10 minutes drive out of sort of the start of the Yarra Valley, was beautiful. Like, when my parents moved back from, and myself, my brother, we moved back from South Australia, they were adamant that they weren't going to move to somewhere that didn't have a lot of beautiful nature and trees, and they were set on sort of continuing to raise us in an area that was close to mountains, close to beautiful areas that we could go and explore and go on hikes on the weekends and things like that. So sort of really wanted to be close to nature and nowhere near concrete sort of jungles. But in saying that, living in that area, we're only 45, 50 minutes away from Melbourne. So it's a pretty ideal spot to live. And, the Yarra is one of those regions where you're not driving hours and hours to get to a significant and a beautiful wine region. So, I felt pretty fortunate that they chose the gateway to the Yarra Valley to, continue raising our family. And little did I know that would influence me. And here I am now, and 10 years on from deciding to jump headfirst into the wine industry, I'm living out here myself, and I probably wouldn't have it any other way, really. I really love it.
Sports science. So that was what you were, that the reason you were supporting yourself working in all those cellar doors. Bit of a sporty girl. Tell me, well, I'm imagining, otherwise why are you doing it? Tell me, this is
absolutely.
Not one, but I want to hear about you as a person.
Yeah, well, nowadays I'm so busy with all of my little wine projects that I have going that unfortunately the sporty side of Tillie's kind of put on the back burner, but I still enjoy going for a bit of a jog every now and then. But I have a bit of a funny way of coming up to sports science, I guess. I was really into sport in my high school years, and horse riding and equestrian was actually what I did for about 10 years of my life, and was an active member of my equestrian team while I was in high school, and I also joined country running and aths and swimming and anything I could really sink my teeth into. I'm not really, I wouldn't call myself a hugely book savvy person. I'm not extremely academic. You'll never find me sitting there reading chapters and chapters out of a textbook. I like to get out there and actually do stuff. I think that's probably where the sports science and the sporty side of me came into action. And just sort of finishing up my final year of high school, year 12, and looking at courses that I wanted to do. And Dad and I sort of sat down, and he was really gunning for me to get into something like sports science, and I still really love the field. And one day, I can't see it happening in the near future. I'm too in love with wine, but it's definitely something that I would fall back on if I needed to. And I've probably still got my notes stashed somewhere in a cupboard at my parents' house. I could dust them off. Remind myself of all the topics. But I had a love for that, and I also have a love for psychology as well. So I decided to major in that while I was studying a science degree, and sort of did a bit of a double whammy of a degree, and went into the psych and did a bit of sports science on the side. So they're both really interesting topics for me, and something that I still love and loved at the time, and really enjoyed studying, and saw it all the way through, which I think was really important to just complete that degree, even though it wasn't something that I ultimately ended up following. I think it really helped me. Even in the wine industry side of things, it helped me get into the little bit of postgraduate study that I did. And my memories of studying sports science are really fond ones, and I still talk to some of my fellow classmates now and then. And I actually had a couple of them come and help me harvest my first harvest day in 2021 when I picked my Pinot, and rallied a troop of all of my friends and family together to help pick that. And a few sports science classmates came out of the woodworks and said, "Hey, we'll come and help you harvest," which was such a buzzy thing to see these people that I hadn't seen in quite some years come and give me a hand in a field that I is so far removed from sports science. But it was great. So
wine, it's great for sport. All athletes should be really familiar with it.
Yeah, definitely. And it's something that I'm sure a lot of athletes, and it's actually funny, like working at one of the cellar doors that I did while I was studying sports science, when we had the Australian Open on, there'd actually be a few of the athletes, when they'd finished or they'd gone out of the tournament, and they had a bit of spare time up their sleeves, they'd come out to the Yarra Valley, and they'd actually sit and have a lunch, and they'd do a wine tasting. And so funny you say that, because obviously these athletes have a life outside of tennis or footy or whatever they do, and quite often fine wine is one of those things. I mean, yourself included, something you're really interested in. And it's not necessarily the thing that pays the bills, but it's a healthy curiosity outside of that. So it's cool to, it was cool to, exactly. So that's kind of where it took me, and still something that I really love to, if someone strikes a bit of a conversation about science or exercise physiology or sports psychology or something, it's like, I'm still really keen to have a conversation about those sorts of things. So still in my heart.
Okay. So let's fast forward a little bit. You're working from cellar door to cellar door, supporting your studies. Where did you work? Were there any big cellar doors that you worked in, or tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. So
the experience of working cellar doors as a young.
Yeah, absolutely.
Adult. Yeah.
Yeah, it was great. Like, I think, working in the hospitality industry in general is a must. I think, like, it really, for a young'un, it really gives you a bit of a setup for public speaking. That was a huge thing, sort of, that I took away from working in cellar doors. I worked probably for the longest time at Rochford, and we did tastings on the weekends. We did huge tastings, anywhere from like 30 to 40 people to little intimate tastings with a couple of people, and being able to speak confidently about a wine and sort of engage people, and at such a young age was a really valuable takeaway skill, I think. We do Day on the Green concerts and all those sorts of things, which was awesome, so much fun. I think taking away sort of all of those skills to be organised, to use initiative and all those things that you get from working in a hospitality sort of space was really important, and it's stuck with me, and it's come in handy working in cellars and wineries around the world as I've travelled as well. And I think some of the best colleagues that I've worked with in wineries and cellars have been those who've come from hospo backgrounds. They're just really switched on.
So interesting you say that, because I had a similar conversation to this with Chris Kilter in the Barossa. And he had a hospitality background. He was a chef before he got into the wine industry. I never did that. I went high school, smashed out my university degree, and then jumped into the real world and sort of hit this stage career-wise where kind of brain dead. Just, I don't know whether it's an early life crisis or whatever you want to call that, but I just wanted to step away. I jumped into hospo and had some really, really good friends that gave me opportunities in the kitchen, worked in really nice bottle stores, doing a little bit of this stuff and just meeting people in the industry. And so many moments I thought, oh my gosh, I wish I had done this before now. Even during university, before going into the professional world. It's such a great environment for learning about yourself, learning about people, learning small little disciplines, organization, working under pressure, because it is pressure, but you also meet terrific people. And then when you jump back into whatever you want to call it, professional life, and then you come across people who were in hospitality, you can pick it. So, nothing phases you. You're organized. You're really down to earth. You're just a decent bloke. And, I worked for, I was a chef, or I was in the wine industry or something, and you go, right, could have picked it.
Makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like I think, and I don't have a family or any kids yet, but I think, if I do in the future, that would be one thing that I would probably instill in them and really encourage them to do, is to take a gap year, or if they want to, or go and do some hospo work and just get that really solid foundation of peopling and time management and all of the great things that you get from that industry before you jump headlong into what you really want to do and what you're passionate about.
Mm-hmm. And did I hear you correctly? Did you say you were at Rochford?
Rochford,
Rochford, sorry. Yeah, okay.
Rochford,
Okay.
Quite often, the two are very similar in name, but Rochford Wines is, sort of, they're not a huge winery, but they're one that has sort of definitely made a name for themselves in hosting the Day on the Green concerts in the Yarra Valley. So that's, great wine and an awesome restaurant. But I think what a lot of people come out for to Rochford is, they've got those concerts, and that's a massive draw card for tourism in the valley. And it was a great place to sort of start and meet a lot of other winemakers and a lot of cool people, and sort of really gave me a taste for what the wine industry was all about starting there. So, I have a lot of cred to give those guys for putting me on this path, I guess.
So coming up to the two chapters that I guess I'm most excited about to discuss with you, one being you leaving Australia, the next you coming back to Australia and kicking off your massive project. I love stories of exotic places far away, possibly because I've done like 1/1,000,000th of the travel that I would like to eventually do. And Europe is a place, embarrassingly, I've never actually been. So talking to people like yourself, I just live vicariously. You share your travel stories, and I lie in bed at night going, maybe one day. But that's what I want to talk to you about, because you've been everywhere. You've done everything. You had a thing for cool climate wines, particularly Pinot, which I think has eventuated in what you're doing, your own style. But am I right in sort of thinking that you followed the cool climate trail, and that sort of took you to a lot of different places, and you had a lot of great experiences? That's what I want to hear about now.
Yeah, absolutely. You're quite right in terms of chasing that sort of climate stream and idea of wines. And COVID's made it so much harder to travel of late, obviously. But Europe, I thought honestly that would be the first place that I would go overseas to experience a Northern Hemisphere harvest. And I thought the no-brainer was going to France. And I haven't done a French harvest yet, which just blows my mind because I'm so into Burgundian varieties and I love Pinot and I love Chardonnay. And I just haven't got there yet. But once travel is back up and running, I think I'm going to sneak away for a sneaky little vintage in Burgundy or Beaujolais would be awesome. I'd love to work in either of those areas. But no, it was actually the US that pulled me up north to begin with, and Oregon specifically. So I did a harvest in New Zealand before heading up to the US, and that was sort of my first little dabble into leaving Australia and seeing the world through wineries, and that's pretty much been the way I've travelled for the last couple of years, is seeing the world through doing a vintage and putting my head down and working hard for a couple of months and saving up a bunch of money, and then hiring a car or jumping on a bus and hitting the road and exploring, my surrounds in that country. So I think it's been an epic way to see the world. It started with heading over to New Zealand, doing a harvest in Marlborough. I just finished doing a vintage in 2013, which was my first one in the cellar. Prior to that, my first harvest was at Coldstream Hills in 2012, but that was in the lab. And I kind of got enticed over, I guess is the right word, by a gentleman who was making some wine at Rochford at the time. And I just finished my sports science degree, and I was a bit lost for what I wanted to do, and was scratching my head. Do I go on and do some postgraduate study and maybe do PE teaching or physiotherapy or something like that? And this cheeky little voice in my ear came up and said, "Oh, how about you do something different and take a bit of a gap year and do a harvest?" And I know the folks over at Coldstream Hills. I can set you up with a job in the lab that's sort of, loosely sciencey. Maybe there's a bit of crossover. And so I thought, yeah, great, I'll jump on that. And did the vintage at Coldstream Hills in the lab, and met Halliday, and he does all of his wine companion tastings, or did at the time, there at Coldstream Hills, and they were quite often, these open bottles were left for us to try at the end of the shift. And I thought, wow, this is incredible. Like, my palate is just expanding at a phenomenal rate, and I've met all these cool people, and I've, the world's pretty much come to me before I've explored the world. I've met someone from Canada, from New Zealand, from Germany, from the US, like just this melting pot of all these different cool people that are here to do the one thing, make wine, work really hard, play really hard, and get through the harvest season, and then move on to the next vintage, somewhere else in the Southern Hemisphere or up north. So, it really blew me away, just this cool industry that was out there, and hey, I'm getting paid to do it at the same time. So at that point, decided to sort of see where this was leading me, and sort of walked away from sports science at the time, and then happy with my decision. But after working at Coldstream Hills, I decided to go and see what the cellar was like and jump out of the lab, and did this at Helen Till.
Can I just ask you one thing on that? Sorry. And I neglected to ask about Coldstream Hills. I feel like an idiot. For the wine, I don't want to say uneducated, but there are a lot of really sort of mysterious, complicated things that people outside the industry look in on, and they go, oh, that kind of hurts my head. What is it like working in a wine lab? So you say lab, Bunsen burners, fast chemicals going everywhere. Yes. What goes on? Can you break down sort of as simplistically as you can what goes on in a wine lab?
I guess you just picture some nutty scientist with a lab coat on and everything, and Bunsen burners and things bubbling and exploding and stuff like that, which there are Bunsen burners, that's for sure. I mean, for checking sulfur levels and things like that, we use Bunsen burners. It's not too dissimilar in its, functionality to being in the winery. You don't feel like you're walking out of the cellar and going into some sort of, well, not at least in this situation. I'm sure there's larger wineries out there who have pretty sterile, clean, very white labs. This one was, we had juice samples going everywhere, and sort of we're checking Beaumets or bricks, and sort of doing a bunch of enzymatic analysis, looking at sort sort of malolactic fermentation, and when ferments are going dry, we're checking really, really low levels of glucose and fructose that are left in the wine before we add sulfur and end the ferment, and a lot of data recording and things like that. So, you know, as we're churning out all these numbers during the day, we're entering them in, you know, at the end of the day, maybe beer in hand, just doing those last little tweaks and putting them all into the computer system so that they're logged. And yeah, sort of I also did a few things like sort of yeast inoculations and things like that, which was sort of
can you expand on that for the average person listening? What is a yeast inoculation? No, I could do this all day. I could pick it out, but I love just sharing little things like that so people understand what you're talking about. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, fleshing it out. So, I mean, you know, you can always use ambient yeast that's in the air. So every winery has its own yeast culture, and that quite often comes from, you know, introduced yeast that you bring in satchels that are like, you know, if you made a loaf of bread or brewed some homebrew in the past, you quite often see those little satchels of yeast that you mix up and add to your pizza dough or whatever. But we've got specific wine-related yeast strains which come in packets, and you quite often rehydrate them in some nice warm water that's not dissimilar to your body temperature, give them a nice little wake up and an introduction to life, and they get all bubbly, and it's a great smell. Like I liken it to sort of Vegemite and those sort of really nice sort of comforting umami sort of flavors, and you're sitting there watching your yeast come back to life, and it smells amazing. And then you're sort of, if you're introducing them into a ferment, you want to introduce a little bit of juice to them and get them sort of going and interested in what you're about to put them into, and get them sort of as close to the temperature of the red ferment or the white ferment that you possibly can. So quite often they're a little bit cooler than the environment that you initially bring them back to life in, and you just drop that temperature bit by bit. And then when you get it within sort of 5 or so degrees of the tank or the fermenter, then you slosh them in and you give them a little tap on the back and say, go and do your thing and ferment the wine, and away you go. And then it's up to the cellar to make sure that tank is healthy, and the lab as well to some degree. We're monitoring temperatures and ferments every single day, and going out there and taking samples and checking the Beaumet as it tracks and it drops down bit by bit, and the temperature, keeping that at a fairly stable or constant rate, and leaving samples for the winemakers to taste and sort of see how it's going and monitor every single day. So we're working pretty closely with the cellar and the winemakers to, you know, make sure our numbers make sense and make sure they're happy with that, and then make adjustments accordingly. So
wow, yeah,
it's super interesting.
Huge.
There wasn't terribly much crossover, now that I think about it, with sports science and what my work that I was doing in the lab, but yeah. I'm glad that I that opportunity was put in front of me anyway.
Yeah. Last question on the Coldstream Hills chapter. James Halliday.
Yeah.
What's he like? You know, I've got the wine
so
companion right over there. But what's he like as a person? I know he was a lawyer, and that's about it.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. He and Len Evans and a few mates got into wine through, you know, his love of Pinot is, everyone knows about that as well. And obviously starting in the Hunter Valley, and I was lucky enough to work for Brokenwood, which is his first winery that he set up. And I'm sure we'll talk about that. But yeah, lucky enough to meet him. He lives next door to Coldstream Hills, and beautiful place perched up on the hills at the foot of the Warramate as well. And he comes down, and there's a little loft above the winery itself where he'd set up all of his tastings for the wine companion when he was doing them. And sometimes we'd go up there and sort of say g'day and open a few bottles for him with the corkscrew or whatever, and just have a bit of banter. But he'd come down and you know, we'd have beers at the end of the day on the lawn out the front of the winery, and he'd come down and bring a wine and sort of put it in front of you and say, what do you think about this? And he's a lovely, very quite softly spoken guy, and has a lot of time to spare for people who come and work at Coldstream Hills, and will be an open book there for the time that, you know, he's down having a glass of wine or a beer with you. And I have very fond memories of bumping into him in the winery at Coldstream Hills. That sort of set the tone looking for, people to extract knowledge from and to find mentors and to sort of forge further within the wine industry.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The man, the myth, the legend. Let's get back on you.
Yeah.
So sorry, you've just jumped the ditch over to New Zealand. I want to hear about all of that.
New Zealand.
So you went to Marlborough.
Yeah. I went to Marlborough. Yeah. So I finished a harvest with Helen's Hill, sort of working under the wing of Scott McCarthy, who's the winemaker there, and he's another lovely guy who I definitely consider a mentor as well. And he sort of showed me the ropes. My first harvest in the cellar, and this is a pump, and this is how you wash a tank, and all of the ins and outs, and built my confidence up in that regard. And very small production there. I think we only did a couple of 100 tons, and it all ended, pretty quickly. It was a pretty compact harvest that year. Everything came in pretty fast. And then I had some time up my sleeve. I finished harvest with them and jumped on sort of some social media platforms, talked to some people that I knew, and teed up a harvest in Marlborough. Before I knew it, I think within about 2 weeks, I bought a plane ticket and I was on my way over there. And that was the first time I'd gone to New Zealand. And here I was. I found myself going from a 200-300 ton crush, if that, to a 12,000 ton crush over in New Zealand. So
wow. Okay.
That was a huge shock to the system. And I was put on night shift for the first time. There was about 25 casuals working with me on night shift, and I was in the white cellar. And here I was making my yeast additions again, but they were 10 times the volume that I was adding back at Coldstream Hills, and it was incredible. Like it's essentially a manufacturing plant, and there's a dozen presses lined up there, and at any given night we would have been processing what Helen's Hill would have done in an entire harvest. We're doing it in a matter of a couple of days. Mm-hmm. But I think it's really important to have those experiences working for the little guys at Helen's Hills, and then going across to somewhere like Yearlands where I worked, and experiencing that real scale up in volume, and to just there's a whole nother world of moving fluids around a winery at such large volumes that I think is really important to wrap your head around and to learn how to do that, because in my experience I think it's a lot easier to downscale than it is to upscale your skills. Mm-hmm. And to come back and do something like Tillie J and make it really small and boutique, but it's a lot harder to wrap your head around the huge 100,000 litre silos of wine that you're working with over in a winery like Yearlands in Marlborough. So and really valuable experience.
Is there a trade-off? I mean, I ask a lot of different people this, and I get kind of similar answer, and it seems to be very appropriate, and nobody's getting under anybody's grill. But big winery, small winery, boutique, attention to detail, integrity of the product, as these massive places with the massive silos where they're just making the stuff on such a large scale. Is it, I keep hitting this mic, is it as simple as you can't have the confidence in the massive stuff as much as you can place in the smaller stuff, or is that oversimplifying something that's quite complicated?
No, if anything, I think you need to be just as careful in a large facility like that. Like, you're working with such large volumes of liquid and wine that if you let a ferment rocket, that's a huge thermal mass to let go out of control, I guess. Like, you almost need to be more on your game in scenarios like that, because it's such a large volume of wine that you're dealing with there. So I think both require your full 110% attention, but in very different ways. And that's another huge take home from working in a large space like that, is that we're working with such large volumes of wine that if something goes wrong, it's going to go wrong on a big scale. That's a really interesting thought.
So, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So back to New Zealand. What was it like as a cultural experience? And it's even, I guess, wine culturally, Marlborough Sauv Blanc. That's the glamour and the glitz of Sauv Blanc on this half of the world anyway, and possibly even all over. But what was that cultural experience like from your perspective?
Oh, it was awesome. Like, I think, there's very few places in the world that have wineries of that scale. And I keep drumming home that's really important to go and visit those and work in them if possible. But like, aside from that, and I guess it's like any experience you have when you go to Europe or the States, you don't really get an idea of what the country has. Like Australia, like you don't see much Australian, really good high-end quality Australian wine in, say, the US or in Europe. But to actually go to Australia and experience the country and to try those wines is really important. And I feel like that's the case for New Zealand as well. Like, yes, we get this idea of there's a lot of Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc out there, and that's what they mainly export. But until you actually go to Marlborough and you visit some of the smaller cellar doors and look at some of the other really interesting varieties that they're producing out there, you kind of, it was like an aha moment sort of thing. Like, it makes sense to me that they're growing a lot of really good Sauv Blanc out there, and that's a great aromatic variety. But there's also other really cool aromatic varieties that are coming out of Marlborough as well. And there's a lot of sort of Germanic settlement going on down there, and you're getting some really cool things. Pinot Blanc, Riesling, Brunner Veltliner, like a lot of other really cool white wine varieties that they're making in such small volumes that they're just not exporting it like they are Sauvignon Blanc. But it was really cool on my days off to travel around and to see what else was happening out there, and was fortunate enough to actually go back to New Zealand for a second time and work at a slightly smaller facility called Framingham, and they specialise in really nice Marlborough Riesling, and that kind of started my interest for Riesling, and I guess helped me to work in Germany in the future as well, and just piqued that curiosity for Riesling as well as obviously Pinot and Chardonnay.
Okay. Last question on New Zealand before we get on a plane and go somewhere else. New Zealand.
Yeah, go for it.
So the Pinot Noir over there. One of the things I find really fascinating about Pinot is I've heard people refer to it as a chameleon. So it's really tough to make, but it also takes on the characteristics of where it is. So I've had a little bit of some really nice Yarra Pinot recently, but had a bottle of Craggy Range. I think it was an 18 or a 19 the other night at a dinner. And I personally found it so different. I really enjoyed both. But I could have gone, if I was blindfolded, and I'm definitely not at that stage where I can blind taste. I could have gone, these are two completely different wines. Really enjoyed both of them. But what if I've got that sort of ballpark correct, what is it over in New Zealand, the different elements and the things that you're dealing with that give the wines different characteristics, a bit of maritime influence, soil, what's going on? Yeah,
well, I think I'm the same. And there's been plenty of, situations where we've, been sitting around at the end of the day at a winery that I've worked at. We've had a blind tasting, and there's been a bunch of people that have, swear that they were drinking a Shiraz from somewhere, or a Syrah, and it turns out to be a Pinot from somewhere that just happens to grow these characters within the Pinot that make it quite Syrah-like, whether it's the tannin structure or the intensity or the concentration. But I think Pinot can really be, like you say, a chameleon in a sense that it's really influenced by the environment that it's grown in. We get quite a lot of rainfall. Canopies are quite full and lush out here in the Yarra Valley, so quite shaded fruit, and that seems to, for some reason or another, promote really soft tannins and really bright, juicy, fruited characteristics. You go somewhere like Central Otago or down to Tasmania, and maybe not quite the rainfall, maybe a little bit more sun exposure, and you just get those sort of quite brooding, sort of dark brooding tannins that can be quite a lot more intense and dense and concentrated compared to the quite light, bright, fruity, playful characteristics that comes of Yarra Pinot. So yeah, it's hugely influenced by the environment, the sunlight, the rainfall, the soil that it's grown in, and I think that's why I fell in love with it as well.
Okay, all right. Jumping on a plane, Oregon.
Yep. Yep.
Is that's the next stop? Okay, and that is, that's got a reputation for magnificent Pinot. Tell me about Oregon, your time there, what you learnt there, and maybe just about your general experiences there.
I love Oregon. I have a really soft spot for Oregon, and maybe it's the time that I spent in Portland on my days off. I'd just go in there and eat and drink and just soak it all in. And I found it to be quite similar to Melbourne, I think, and I felt quite at home when I was there. They've just got such a great culture. Like, dare I use the word hipster, but maybe that's the similarity that I draw to Melbourne. There's a lot of people getting around in black and beanies and Doc Martens and things like that. Like they're quite similar areas, and the food, everyone just takes food so seriously, and just it's amazing. Every street seems to have some sort of amazing restaurant or
culinary
the center of Portland. Yeah, absolutely, and a lot of beer and a lot of distilling as well, which I think the Yarra's going in that direction as well, and Melbourne in general, lots of craft breweries and things like that popping up down here. So loved it, and again, the Willamette Valley is similar in its sort of orientation to Portland. It's not hard to drive in there and spend a day. It's an hour or so drive in. So that's naturally where I would head on my days off. I'd go and do some tastings in other wineries as well. But there was some massive draw to going into Portland and just walking around and having a really good coffee. They had really good coffee there as well, which I feel as a Melbourneite was something that was pretty important to me too. So started the day with a good coffee. And
I've got a lot of family over there, kind of spread. Well, the family is in Kansas City, Missouri. And it's
cool.
Home away from a home. Love it to death. Such a beautiful place with history. Need to work on the coffee. I've got some siblings over there who might tell me that they've found the place that does good coffee over there. But when the times I've spent over there, I've kind of stopped, unless I really need just whatever it is they've got to offer. I go for something completely different.
No, there's some places that really don't nail it. Yeah. I don't call myself a coffee snob, but when you're in places like that and the coffee's just so milky you can't even taste the coffee in there. It's just not the best.
Mm-hmm.
But no, Oregon. The first time I've actually worked there twice. The first time I worked there in 2014, I worked for a winery called Ponzi Vineyards, and they're right on the cusp of the Willamette Valley. It almost feels like you're still in the burbs when you're working there. They're right there on the fringe, and awesome experience. I worked in their relatively new winery that they'd built a year or so before I worked there, and that was probably my first experience with gravity flow wineries. It was built on the side of a hill, and you sort of started the process up on the very top floor. That's where all the fruit was received and it came in, and then it was destemmed or pressed down to the next level, and everything went down through sort of fixed hoses that no pumps were really used, and then it was sort of by gravity moved into the fermenter or the tank, and then when that was done and it was pressed off, the barrels and everything, that was down on the next level, and then they had a bottling floor on the very bottom level. So it was a really smart setup, and that sort of was the beginning of my exposure and work with gravity flow wineries, which I think is really cool and a great way to do it if you can.
And what is the deal with that? I mean, it sounds really cool. And is that just attention to detail and delicate glove handling of the whole process? What's the benefit of gravity flow?
Yeah, I think, and I think Chris might have touched on this as well. Something like Pinot and Chardonnay is a variety that is really quite delicate and fragile. And if you don't need to move it, then don't. Keep it in its barrel or its tank or its vessel for as long as possible. And they're both varieties that really benefit from lees contact, I guess. So you'll be leaving them on their solids for as long as possible, whether that's to build texture or just to keep it in an oxygen-free reductive environment. So if you can do it as gently as possible and without smashing it and bashing it around using a pump, although there are a lot of really good gentle pumps out there these days, I feel like gravity is the gold standard, is kind of king in that sense. And it's the way to go if you can.
Okay.
These guys had it on lock at Ponzi, I think. So took a lot of good cues from working there.
Mm-hmm. Oregon wine culture and wine environment generally. So it's very cool climate, which is why it would produce such magnificent Pinots, etc. But what goes into that from your perspective?
The cool climate sort of characteristics of Oregon.
Yeah, and that the makeup of why does it produce such wonderful Pinot Noir?
Yeah, they're such powerful wines. Like, I don't think the Yarra, although the Yarra makes some beautiful Pinot, and I'm really into the Yarra Valley style of Pinot, there's just something so sort of powerful and intense and concentrated about Oregon Pinot. And again, I think it must come down to the area that they're in. They're in this really beautiful valley. They do get a lot of rainfall, but I feel like they get quite intense fluctuations in temperature as well that really helps to ripen the fruit slowly and build that intensity and that flavour and really make something that's quite natural and quite powerful. And then I guess the oak that they choose as well, which is quite a personal preference, I think. And I learnt definitely not something that you would, the type of oak that they choose, which is quite robust and toasty and it has quite an influence structurally and in the tannin on their wines as well, is not necessarily something that would complement Yarra Valley Pinot. I came back with a lot of grand ideas and did a lot of barrel tastings and thought I had a good idea of, what sort of barrels I'd like to use and apply to my own wines when I got back. But then, mentors and people that I spoke to when I got back and I said, oh, I'd love to use blah, blah, blah barrel. I tasted this amazing Pinot out of this barrel in Oregon and I'd really like to apply that to the wine that I'm making. And I'd been reined in and said, no, you're not making that style of Pinot, Tillie. You're not making Oregon Pinot. You're making Yarra Valley Pinot. Like, come back down to earth. Like this, you want to use this sort of barrel. So, yeah, they're really into their oak. And Kristen, where I worked the second time, uses quite a lot of new oak as well in their wine. So I found drinking Oregon Pinot really young, it can be quite awkward. The oak takes a little bit of time to integrate into the wine, and a lot of their higher end Pinot could definitely benefit from laying down for a couple of years before you open it up and have a look at it. So yeah, definitely a style that I love to drink, but not one that I make down here in the Yarra Valley, but took a lot of lessons home from making it. Gravity is definitely one of those.
Was Germany next?
Yeah. Well, I've done Canada as well. Canada was pretty interesting.
Quick synopsis of Canada. Sorry, I'm just going to extract everything. I'm loving this so much. So Canada, cool, freezing cold.
Yeah, Canada was really buzzy. I'll try and sum it up in a nutshell, but that was a really interesting experience in that I was still chasing cool climate varieties and worked for a winery sort of at the top of Lake Okanagan, so the northern part of it, which is quite close to Kelowna, which is the main city there. And the winery I worked for produced a lot of different varieties. So they did a mixed bag of really lovely aromatic varieties from the northern part of the Okanagan Valley, so Pinot and Chardonnay and Riesling and Pinot Blanc and all those sort of lovely cool climate varieties. But then they also harvested a lot of fruit from down south of the Okanagan Valley, which is where the lake kind of ends, and then you've got this area which is between the bottom of the lake and the border into Washington State. And it's almost like a desert out there. Like, there's no sort of maritime effect or there sort of moderation of the temperature from that you would get off of the lake in the northern parts. It was cold as hell nights and really warm days, sort of almost quite desert. And we'd get some Bordeaux varieties and some warmer climate Chardonnay from down there. And the year I was there, they got hit with quite a bad frost just as we were about to pull the Bordeaux off, probably a week out. And it's the first time I'd ever seen vines completely shut down and just think it was winter time and decide it was time to go to sleep while they had these almost ripe bunches hanging on them. And it was quite an eerie thing to see. When
do you just harvest as quick as you can, or how do you get through that?
Yeah, we did. So we let it hang for as long as, you know, physically and mentally and emotionally possible. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it was sort of like these vines weren't going to ripen these bunches anymore because they literally had no leaves on them, and they're your motors that photosynthesize and that are going to draw in the sunlight essentially and ripen the bunches. So they're just sitting there on the vine, kind of just hanging out. So we did make the decision to pull the fruit in, and it was it was buzzy. There was a definite shift in morale in the winery after that sort of happened. It was very sort of like jovial party times. Harvest is looking great, and then it was kind of like, oh, you know, this big wet blanket kind of descended over the winery, and it was like, oh, bummer, this is reality. And it was like, you need to have those experiences to challenge you and to put your problem solving skills into play and work with the fruit that you've got and do the best you can. So that was a really interesting experience from that perspective, that I haven't worked in a region to date that has such a diverse spectrum of fruit coming from such a diverse geographical area, I guess, you know, from really lovely, delicate, cool climate, a sort of microclimate, I guess you could say, up the northern part of the lake, to essentially desert down the bottom in that area, as you're heading towards the border into the US. Very, very interesting.
2 questions on that. What's the epilogue to that story? What ended up happening?
It's really sad, you know, because I never got to try those wines as a result of the hard work that we put in the year that I was there. I think that was 2016, and that's simply boils down to the fact that Canadian wine doesn't really make its way out of Canada. So unless you're there, and there's even sort of, they've got a funny system there where sometimes you can't even get wine from the East Coast sent over to the West Coast. Like, all of the states or the provinces are very much run within the province, and if that means that they don't allow you to send wine from place to place within Canada, then you can't get your hands on it. I mean, we've got it so good here in Australia that if we want to buy a bottle of Grenache from McLaren Vale, we can just go over there and punch it in on the website, and, you know, a couple of days later the bottle of wine's ended up on your doorstep. It just doesn't work that way sometimes in Canada, and they just don't export much of their wine at all to the rest of the world. So it's hard to get your hands on. And I kind of took this vintage experience on a whim, and trusting a friend's recommendation that the wine was good over there, and I hadn't really tried Canadian wine, and I thought, cool, let's experience it and see what they got. And it blew me away. They have some amazing wine there, and I just wish that more of it was exported overseas.
Touch on Germany, or I think we're up to Germany.
Yeah, I'm
You've been everywhere,
darting all over the place, but I think it's relatively chronological at this point.
Yeah.
I think during these Northern Hemisphere experiences, I'd also ducked back into Australia and done a harvest in the Southern Hemisphere to sort of, I wasn't killing time, was I? I was looking for more experience in the Southern Hemisphere before I went back up to the Northern Hemisphere. So, I think the vintage before I went up to Germany was where I did my vintage at Brokenwood, which arguably I think is probably my warmest climate vintage experience, and that was really interesting. Like, still making beautiful Shiraz that's super delicate, and alcohol levels of, you know, 12 and a half, compared to, you know, the more rambunctious sort of boozy Shirazes you can get from South Australia. But still super lovely region, and I made a lot of really good connections there, and had an awesome time making Semillon and Shiraz and various other varieties at Brokenwood. And then from there jetted up to Germany and caught a flight there, and first time I had experienced a country that English wasn't the first language, although people in Germany were super accommodating of my lack of German, and I, you know, you throw yourself into that environment and you generally pick it up a little bit. And I think, although I wasn't stringing sentences of German together, I could definitely wrap my head around conversations and what people were saying and gain a bit of an idea. So
did anybody there speak English?
Heaps, actually. Like, yeah, a lot of, when you were in a lot of major cities, there were a lot of English-speaking German people, or just tourists, or people who reside in Germany that speak English as well. So it wasn't too hard. The more you got out into countryside and wine country, the fewer people there were that spoke English. But that's all right. The family I worked for were very accommodating of that, and I worked with an American fellow as well, who the two of us kind of, when our ears were fatigued from trying to pick up German, we would, speak our mother tongue together, which was often handy. But yeah, I flew in there, and that was a flight that landed quite late, and needed to catch the train out to the Rheinhessen, where I was working quite late at night, navigating a lot of German signage and buying my ticket and thinking I was getting on the right train, which I essentially was, but it was an abridged version of it, and it dropped me at a station a few stops before the one I ultimately wanted to get off on, and that was the end of the line. So, scratching my head, I found a little it's like a little late night bar with a bunch of people sitting in there drinking spirits and smoking cigarettes, and did my best impression possible to ask someone to call a taxi for me to get me to this village that I needed to get to work, because I was not going to sleep at the station that night on my first night in Germany. That was just a terrifying thought to me. And I successfully had a taxi called, and we sort of awkwardly figured out where I was going on Google Maps, and I was dropped off out the front door of the winery that I was due to start work at 6 o'clock the next morning. And thank goodness I was greeted by the family there, and the American fellow who I would then go on to work with. So that was a little bit anxiety provoking, but first experience landing in a country in Europe where English wasn't the first language spoken. So it all got a lot easier from there. And worked for Cellar for harvest there, and it was also the first harvest that I'd worked pretty much 100% in the vineyard. That's where all the action happens, and I still believe that that's where a lot of the action happens as well. And working with Riesling, which is, they would produce everything from, go on.
Oh, I love it. German Riesling. That's all. I'm just smiling.
Yes.
That would have been utopia almost.
Oh, it was so fascinating. And the Keller family picked every day with us in the vineyard, like Klaus Keller, who's the father of Peter Keller. He was the only one, this old guy, he was the only one who worked in the winery. He did all the pressing, he did all the barreling down, he did all of the, moving to tank and everything like that. It was a little underground cellar, and it was just him working in silence, which blew my mind, because every cellar I've worked in before, playing loud music is what gets you through the day. And he just did his thing and chipped away, and it was just him, and we were all out there picking. So it was myself, American friend, and the Keller family, and then they had a bunch of guys that came in from Hungary, from Croatia, and they would come in and pick with us as well. And it was such funny banter that we had between all of them, because it was this strange thing where we were all trying to learn each other's language and learn buzzwords about, give us another bucket, or move out of the way of the tractor, or something like that in each other's language, and we'd all laugh, and I built some awesome rapport with these guys, and I really hope they're still doing what they're doing and in a good place. And really cool experience. Exhausting, and there was a heat wave there in Germany in 18 when I was working there, and something that they hadn't experienced in a really long time as well. So I think they found it really challenging, again, harvesting in what you would call a cool climate region, while battling with, essentially Australian heat wave temperatures there some days. So
we'd
get out there and
that warm, because I would have thought a German
hot
heat wave was 20 degrees, which is just stunning.
No, yeah, we were up there in the 30s some days. Yeah, it was full on, and they were freaking out a little bit. Like, and it was interesting to see because a lot of the wineries have plots and vineyards planted right next door to other producers, and it was really interesting to see how they all practice their viticulture to get around this heat. And some people just didn't acknowledge it at all, and they were, leaf plucking on the morning sun side of the canopies, and you could see a lot of sunburn coming into the Riesling bunches and things like that, and others were sort of leaving a lot of canopy on and trying to get as much shade as possible. But really, really buzzy experience. And we were picking very early in the morning, and quite often we'd cut it sort of around lunchtime where it just got too hot and there wasn't the refrigeration other than being in a really thick stone winery. There wasn't, the chilling that we have and the refrigeration that we have in Australian wineries, because we're very prepared for these heat waves. They weren't so much. So very interesting experience and very cool. I mean, we would do multiple passes of all of their vineyards, make any spectrum of Riesling, from your Trockens to your Trockenbeerenauslese and everything in between. So really dry Riesling to your really sweet stickies, and it was really cool to see. And Klaus Keller's such a perfectionist, and he would have us all picking a particular vineyard, and then he'd notice that he wanted to leave a bunch of panels because they looked like a good prospect for maybe a Cabernet or a Spätlese or something like that. They had a little bit of botrytis in them, or and he'd pull us up and he'd say, no, stop, move to these panels and start picking here, or move further down the vineyard, which was so interesting. And it really cemented to me why you're picking at the right time, and what happens on picking day is such an important step of the winemaking process. And took a lot from that. And amazing vineyards, so picturesque and pretty. And I had the chance to pick for them in the Mosel as well, which they had taken up a lease on a small parcel of fruit in the Mosel as well for the first time. And we got to travel there and harvest, and that is one of the most beautiful wine regions in the world. And if I could recommend going there when you get the chance to travel, go and check out the Mosel. It's beautiful.
You're killing me. My brother worked there for a very long time. He was an engineer, and weekly he'd be sending me all these photos from places that he traveled to, and it just looked like a fairyland. And that's not even wine regions, just the picturesque little villages that look like they're out of the Middle Ages, but this charm, and just looks beautiful. And I'm a sucker for Riesling.
Oh, me too. Yeah, magical. I don't know how they do it. I mean, just getting that acid and sugar balance is just, it's a dark art to me. But I still love drinking them, and my memories of working there are very fond ones.
Okay, so at this stage, so let's go back to Australia. Let's start that chapter of your life where you've sort of come back and you kick off JT Wines, let's call it. What's going through your head? So you've just been everywhere, you've done everything, you've seen the world. Like, to me at that stage, I don't know if maybe you've had so much time to reflect that everything's sort of come together and you've gone, that's what I want to do. But what was going through your head? Mine would just be swimming.
Yeah, all of this amazing knowledge, and where do I channel it? I came back to Australia after all of that travel at the end of 2018, and while I was away overseas, I'd managed to tee up I knew I was coming home, and I'd managed to tee up a harvest with Sarah Crowe at Yarra Yering for 2019, and had that to look forward to coming back into Australia. And the whole time while I was traveling and gaining all of this experience, like I knew that I wanted to channel it into making my own wine and creating a brand, and having a crack at putting out a bunch of cool climate wines that were a result of all of this experience that I'd gained over my travels. So I came back and worked with Sarah, which was an amazing experience and super timely, I think, coming back to the Yarra Valley and working under such a knowledgeable, influential to me figure in the Yarra Valley, and someone who's really killing it down there as a female winemaker, and just really, it was another mentor of mine coming back and working in the region that I started off. I think it was quite a timely thing, and I'm glad that it all panned out that way. When I came back to Melbourne, I caught up with some friends, and they mentioned to me a small urban winery that was starting up in Healesville, with the sort of aim to have a front of house sort of tapas bar style of wine bar setup, but then out the back a small production space which they were going to use as a launching platform for small winemakers like myself, or aspiring winemakers, where they would provide the space and the opportunity to bring in 2 tons of a variety of our choice and make it in that space, with the guidance of a mentor to help us sort of execute our first vintage and give us a bit of an education of everything in between, from the sort of administrative side of it as well, which I found really important. Applying for liquor licenses, getting your books up and running, label design, ordering your dry goods, and doing all that sort of stuff that you don't really experience when you're traveling the world doing vintages in wineries. You're just doing the nitty gritty, sort of the dirty work, I guess, of working with juice and fermenting it into wine and driving forklifts and stacking barrels and all that sort of stuff. And it was if you want to run your own small wine business, these are really important things that you can't ignore. And until you've got the money to pay someone else to do it, it's you that has to learn how to do it. So sort of getting involved. And by the way, this little urban winery is called Number 7, and they're still doing the Young Winemaker program, and taking in a number of people such as myself and giving them a launching platform to start their own brand. And there's been a lot of people that I've stayed really good friends with who are still going strong and still making their wine every year.
That's fantastic. It's such a good thing to be doing, really giving people a leg up like that. What point did it, occur to you that you were going to go off and start your own thing?
Yeah, like as I said, like the whole time when I was traveling, it was something that I was itching to get back and do. Like, don't get me wrong, I still wanted to travel, and I was never homesick. And I think just when the time was right, which happened to be at the end of 2018, coming back and doing that was sort of the direction I took. Travel was over for now. I wanted to come home and put some roots down and put all of that knowledge into essentially a bottle of wine. And I wasn't going to force the issue. It wasn't, it was something that had to happen organically. And I think finding out about this little winemakers program was just a really timely thing that popped up over a beer with friends, which was really cool. And it was, I'm probably more of a scientific person than a trust the universe kind of person, but it kind of just happened that way. It kind of fell into my lap, which was really cool.
Okay. And what was that a springboard into what came next, in terms of they take you in, they teach you the art of being a winemaker, front end, back end, etc. And then what happens? How many vintages can you do there? How do you graduate from that program, for none of a better
it is
word?
It is more or less a graduation. Yeah, only one. It's sort of a one vintage situation where they get you up and running. And the other cool thing, I guess, is that the wine you make, they take half of that, or buy half of that, and promote it through their wine bar, which I thought was a really cool sort of start to, because it's one thing to make a wine, and a lot of winemakers, I guess, will attest to this, is that the making part is easy. It's the selling part that sometimes comes with a challenge, and getting your wine out there and spruiking it and hitting the streets and putting it in front of restaurants and wine bars and wine shops is another ball game in itself. So I found that to be a really useful stepping stone doing this young winemakers program was that they guaranteed you a bit of a start off in the retail space, selling your wine through their restaurant, their wine bar, and sort of giving you some promotion and a bit of a runway to kind of go with. So that was their half that they bought, and then the other half that they leave you was up to you to do what you wanted with. You could give it to friends and family, you could drink it all yourself, or you could go about the process of applying for a liquor license and selling it and running with it yourself, which is what I chose to do.
And when they sell it, are they selling it under your label? I'm sort of waiting. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Wow,
yeah,
that's great.
Yeah. So it's not like, they're not chucking a house red label on it or something like that. It's they're championing your brand.
Yeah.
And putting it on their shelf and with a lot of gusto and pride. They're saying this is a wine that, Tillie's made under our roof, and this is her brand, and we're selling it, by the glass or by the bottle in our restaurant, which I thought was really cool.
Right. Okay. So that was pretty much the birthplace of your project that you're working on now, and you fast forward.
Absolutely.
And you've just scored, I think it was a 95 in the companion on your Pinot. Correct me if I've got that wrong. But that's you've done big things, and you're working on a Chardonnay. When we were talking before, you showed me a bottle. I'm not sure if you brought that with you.
Brought it with me.
There you go. So tell me how the project has grown since the start to today, and what your plans are, and what you're hoping for with it, apart from the obvious, just making great wines.
Yeah, well, it was really cool to start with the one wine, the Pinot, and I think that was important to sort of cement that foundation of gaining drinkers and consumers' trust in terms of this one wine that I make, and I make it really well. And then going on to making it a Chardonnay, sort of not growing my range too quickly or turning it into a bit of a Frankenstein or something that it's not supposed to be, growing very slowly and organically, and also, within my financial means as well, because that's a huge part of it. So, to get that really good score, which was awesome. And, I think it really put me in good stead for sort of putting me out there in the hospitality scene and on the market to go. And it's now sold out and it's done really well, this Pinot, and I've made it since 2019, and every vintage that I've made so far is sold out prior to making the next, which I think is a good problem to have. Like, I hate having to tell loyal customers and restaurants and bars that I supply my wine to that it's gone and the next release will be when I make the next wine. But it's great that I don't have a problem selling it, and it's really doing well in the market. And hopefully it continues to. And I hope, even though the Chardonnay's only just gone into bottle and it's going to hit the market very soon, I hope that it's as well received as the Pinot is.
And is that the Pinot and the Chardonnay, is that sort of a reflection of styles that you're passionate about? Like, you started with a Pinot, and the trail you've taken, you're obviously very passionate about Pinot. What are you sort of thinking, without giving away any secrets? Pinot, Chardonnay, what would you love this project to eventually look like?
Pinot and Chardonnay are by far my passions, and what I love to drink with a meal during the week, and it's what I find myself opening a lot. Chardonnay and Pinot are such fascinating varieties, and I think Chardonnay particularly, like I consumed it and enjoyed it this whole time, but I didn't realize how much fun it was to make as well. There's just, you can do so many things to it, and I think this Chardonnay that I've made has been an application of all of the things that I've learnt in wineries around the world. And another winery in Margaret River that I worked at, but we didn't touch on, Lewin Estate, which makes, in my opinion, some of the best Chardonnay in Australia. I took so much away from that as well, and I've applied little bits and pieces, be it sort of experimenting with wild ferments or inoculations, or really old barrels or really new barrels, or adding a little bit more lees to build texture. Just in such a small batch of wine, I think it was only about 6 or 7 barrels. I've tried to apply as many different winemaking techniques as I possibly can. So hopefully that comes through in the wine, and it's reflective of what I've done to craft it and love it and bring it up to what it is today in the bottle. So other than that, I think in 2022, which is what we are at the minute, there's going to be a few new additions to the range as well, and sort of doing homage to Mum, who is a rosé fanatic. We're going to make a little rosé for her, which will also be for sale to the general public too. So what I like to do, and I've done last year with my Pinot and this year as well, I usually rally a bunch of friends and family and hospo friends and people from restaurants and wine bars that I sell my wine to, and invite them out to the Yarra to help me pick my Pinot. And it's sort of a celebration of getting it to that point and moving on to the next stage to be made into wine. We're going to do the same thing for Mum and get a bunch of family and her friends out to pick some red for a little rosé for her. So we'll make that, and we'll probably call it Anna's Rosé, and she'll probably be my main customer in that regard, and I'll sell a little bit out to the wider public. But that's one new addition, and the other being a massive deviation from Cool Climate Wine and the Yarra Valley. I was fortunate enough to be part of something called Project 5255, which is a Langhorne Creek initiative where acknowledging the region and small producers, and I've been sort of offered or gifted a couple of tons of Grenache from Langhorne Creek to make a wine. In the style that I'd like to make it, whilst doing justice to Langhorne Creek as a region. So it's really cool, and it's only been going for a couple of years. And Charlotte Dalton, who did quite well in Young Gun last year, submitted her Fiano that she made from the same project, and obviously did quite well, and she went on to win Young Gun, which I think was a great boost for not only her brand but for also Langhorne Creek as a wine region. And so I'm going to chuck my Grenache onto the back of a refrigerated reefer, and we're going to ship it over to the Yarra Valley and see what I can do and make it into something that fits in my little range that I'm building, and also sort of seeing Langhorne Creek as a region as well. So a lot of people I've spoken to, the general comment, I guess, is that Grenache can sometimes be interpreted as a bit of a warm climate Pinot variety. You can treat it quite like Pinot. You can get away with quite a lot of whole bunch. It does quite well in neutral or older oak as well. So if I can make it as a bit of a fun, spicy, playful, fruity style of Grenache that sits quite well next to my Pinot, I'll be pretty stoked. So we'll see what happens.
I'm already excited. Tillie, you've been so generous with your time. I promise you, I am winding this up slowly. So just a few questions to go. Right, I'll let you go. First,
I've run out of water.
All right, I'll get on with it.
Might have to open my wine.
Straight out of the bottle. First question being, so I'm up here in Brisbane. I've read that you can probably only access your wines down in Melbourne. If I'm up in Brisbane, you're down in Melbourne. Where do I go to buy them?
Well, the happy medium between you and I is New South Wales. Yeah, absolutely. Like I have, I've sent quite a few bottles up to Queensland, obviously directly through my website. Probably best way to buy it at this stage is through me. I have distribution through Andrew Gumson Wine Merchants in New South Wales, so he covers Sydney and Greater. He also covers Canberra as well. Not too sure if he goes quite as far north as Queensland, but funnily enough, my wines actually ended up in a little Epicurean sort of delicatessen store in Darwin as well, funnily enough. But I haven't made it into many retail outlets in Queensland yet. But I think, now that my range is expanding, there could be opportunity for that as well in the future. But yeah, for now, I think the best way to probably buy it is through me at this stage, and I'll send it up.
Noted. Second last question. I ask this to everybody. There's 2 questions. So, a moment in your wine career. Some people even say they don't have this moment. The whole thing's good, but a moment in your winemaking career to date where it was maybe let's just say it was the top moment where you knew you were doing the right thing, you knew you were heading in the right direction, and you just felt awesome about it.
Yeah, I think that one's, it's pretty easy. And it wasn't that long ago. It was when I had organised the picking day for my Pinot in 2021, which was the first vintage that I'd sort of seen the fruit from pruning the vineyard to bud burst to, doing the wire lifts to shoot thinning, nurturing it up to that stage and picking or selecting the picking date that I wanted to harvest. And I'd put the word out to everyone I knew, both in hospo and around my family and my friend circle, and my partner Tom had spoken to a lot of his friends and said, come out and pick Pinot on this day. And you get a lot of people who will say, yeah, I'll come out, but I really wasn't sure how many people were going to show up on the day. And I did my best to cater. I had coffee and pastries in the morning, and then we had a barbecue at the end and beers and everything. And yeah, and we started early on a Sunday morning. So, a lot of the people from hospo that said they'd come out, I thought, they're not going to come out at 7 o'clock in the morning after they'd been doing service all night on the Saturday night beforehand. But sure enough, I turned up and set everything up for everyone and turned around, and there was a convoy of probably about 30 people wandering down to the vineyard to help me pick my Pinot. And yeah, it was at that point that I thought, how cool is this? Like, I've worked pretty hard to this point to start this brand and get it out there, and I'm so proud of what I've done to this point, and to sort of see that mirrored back at me in terms of all of these people who wanted to come and support me and help me make my Pinot for 2021 was, a huge warm and fuzzies moment.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's probably my highlight, I reckon.
That makes a heck of a lot of sense. So I think for a lot of, that is so warm and fuzzy. That's almost Hollywood creme de la corn. It's so cliche. It's
definitely corny. Yeah,
and it really happened. That's, I guess, what makes it so good. So good on you.
Yeah, you'd see it in a movie, I reckon.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the Tillie Johnston movie, you'll definitely know whether you've nailed that scene properly.
That's the warm and fuzzy rom-com moment, I think.
Definitely.
Crescendo.
Definitely. Wine moment. So you've been everywhere. There isn't much you haven't done. America, Europe and Germany, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, probably some other places that we haven't had time to cover. Has there been a wine that you've tasted that just blew your mind, ethereal, best thing you've ever had?
It's so hard to pinpoint one wine, but I think if I'm allowed to pinpoint one variety, I would say Chardonnay probably blows me away every single time. Like, it's just such a cool variety. And now that I've spent years and years making it or drinking it, I should say, and making it for other people in cellars, I've now realized how much I enjoy making it myself as well. But, it doesn't matter whether it's from Chablis or from Margaret River or here in the Yarra Valley. Like, there's just been probably the one variety that I would have to say that I pour a glass and put my nose in the glass. It's that variety every time. Just gives me the wow factor. And I think it's a really exciting variety, and I'm so thrilled that I'm having the chance to actually get to make it. So hopefully I can continue doing that and learning and doing things a little bit differently each time and tweaking it, because it's such a malleable variety and it's, I love it.
Okay. Final question, and it's sort of going to piggyback on that previous question. So you said that you love pouring a Chardonnay from wherever it is, sticking your nose in it, giving it a bit of a swirl, and then having that moment of bliss after. What are you looking for? And the further question being, for somebody who's either just started their wine journey or has been drinking wine for a long time casually, or anybody, what do you think are some tips on just getting the most out of your wine experience, drinking it, buying it, etc., all of the above?
Yeah. I think don't drink it now, and see what you think. And if you think it's too early to say, or too early to drink this wine, it's a bit young, then of course go back, buy another bottle and put it down. Unless of course it's something like, Grange or something like that, where a one bottle is kind of all you can manage. But just enjoy it for what I really love youthful wines and wines that are young and playful in their youth, and something like Chardonnay, I'm just looking for something that's light and elegant on its feet, but has so much depth and complexity and layers. It might have like a bit of a match flinty, funky barrel ferment thing going on, but then and it's volumes turned up to 10 in terms of aromatics. It's just screaming at you out of the glass. But then when you take a sip and put it in your mouth, it's seamless. It's so light and elegant and delicate. And I think that's what I really enjoy about drinking that variety. And it can be so complex and layered, but then at the same time, it's seamless and it's so salivating and moreish, and you just want to go back for another glass. It's not meaty and a meal. It's so enjoyable and almost hydrating and refreshing to drink.
Tillie Johnston, it's been an honour and a privilege sitting here with you. You have given up way more of your time than I deserved. But thank you so much.
Anytime.
Great. I'll careful what you say. I will definitely take it. That. But
come and check in again.
I'll come to a vintage.
I'm sure I'll be doing something new. Yeah.
But no, thank you so much for your time. All the best with the your project, the Chardonnay, the Rosé, whatever it is you do next, the Grenache. That just sounds so very exciting, and I can't wait till the people up here wake up and eventually I start seeing your wine in the places up here. But thank you so much for your time.
You'll be the first to know. Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on for a chat. It was awesome.
Absolute pleasure. Tillie Johnston is somebody who travelled the world and then brought the world back to the Yarra Valley. The rest has been terrific. Thanks, Tillie.
No worries.